Initiation by Elisabeth Haich, Chapter 13, Second Encounter with Death. At last, it was my wedding day. Looking back now, it seems as if it must have been a dream. All decked out in a white dress with a train and wearing a lace veil, I stepped into our living room, saw how splendid my fiancé looked in his best Sunday suit, and laid my hand on his arm. We were photographed, much to my annoyance, as the photographers made me nervous, and then we went out and down the steps and got into a carriage, all decorated with flowers. We were followed by Greet and my cousin wearing pink silk dresses, and accompanied by two boy cousins with whom we had formed our alliance of eternal friendship. Both of them were now gallant young officers. Then came my brother and his sad and serious face. He was 14, and my little sister, pretty as a doll, was 4. She looked completely self-assured and quite superior among the adults. Then came a whole crowd of relatives, including beautiful Aunt Raffaella, dressed like a queen, then my fiancé's mother, and finally my own mother, radiantly young and beautiful, accompanied by father, who in his top hat and tails was truly a splendid sight, enough to make any woman's heart beat faster. When he saw I was amused at his top hat, he gave me a roguish look, which clearly meant he considered all these formalities just as ridiculous as I did. If only he knew, I thought, how much I'm suffering in these arm-length gloves. I would have just loved to rip them off. They were such an obstacle to free movement. As I held my bouquet in my hands and stood beside my fiancé with a flower in his buttonhole, it seemed to me that we were two sacrificial animals gaily adorned with flowers, forced by the tyranny of almighty custom to go through with all this fancy nonsense. It would have suited me best if I'd been able to run away, so that the crowd of old aunts and uncles, friends, and strange spectators could not look at us like two dolls in an exhibition. I knew that they were thinking of the one thing I regarded as the supreme sacrament, the fulfillment of love. But with what a difference of viewpoint. And I knew that some of the men present were whispering stupid jokes to each other, but I could not escape, and soon the long line of cars was underway towards the church. A few moments later we were inside, standing before the altar. I tried to appear agitated and sentimental, but without success. I felt just as matter-of-fact as ever. As patiently as I could, I listened to the wise and beautiful things our friend and family pastor was saying. He looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that he was thinking how I had asked him not to make a long speech at our wedding, as otherwise I would be forced to yawn big and loud out of utter boredom. At the same time, Mother was incensed about my boundless impertinence, but at least I succeeded in prevailing on the pastor to give a wise but short talk. Thank goodness, a long speech at a wedding ceremony has never made a happy marriage. Soon the crowd of friends and relatives were swarming about, kissing us and embracing us for 3/4 of an hour, with old uncles taking full advantage of the opportunity to hug and kiss the young bride from every side, while I suffered their attentions with silent disgust. Finally, all this was over too, and we only had to bear up through the wedding banquet. At last, the relatives and friends took leave, and I changed my clothes to begin my honeymoon trip with my husband. In becoming the wife of my beloved after this long period of waiting, I experienced extreme happiness, as expected I would. I had attained my goal. I had become his wife before God and humanity. Between us, there were no longer any forbidden signs. I loved him passionately with my entire being, and he loved me in just the same way. I experienced the highest fulfillment of love in body and soul. And then everything collapsed around me. I dashed my head even more violently against the black wall I had struck once before. For the second time in my life, I encountered death. Excuse me. This time the meeting was much more serious. As long as I was waiting for happiness, there was a fixed point in my future towards which I was moving. I had something I was waiting and working for. But when the expected event materialized, the future suddenly became empty. I fell into a vacuum, for I did not know what I still had to wait for. What was there in the future for me to look forward to? I had achieved everything. Whatever else might come could only serve to fill out the remaining time. The remaining time? Remaining time till when? And the answer was, until death. I was forced to realize that no matter what else I might do or attain in this life, or whatever my destiny might bring me, I and all other people with me were moving only in one direction, towards death, without the slightest possibility of being able to move in any other. Nobody can show me in advance how long it will take him to get there, but sooner or later we all fall into this void. I was obliged to realize that even our love could not last forever, for the simple reason that sooner or later one of us would have to die. Then happiness would be over. In the presence of my husband, when I looked into his bright, loving eyes, I felt, I felt as if a cold hand were strangling me. And deep down within me, I heard the question, how long will you be able to see these beautiful eyes? What will the future bring? Even though you may be ever so happy, and supposing you will live a long life with him, even an exceptionally long one, sooner or later the end will be the same, namely that he will either have to close your eyes or you will have to close his. Then you will lose each other and have to say goodbye. Time passes with amazing rapidity, and it won't matter much whether the end comes after a short time or a long time. The greatest happiness, the most beautiful love, everything must someday come to an end, and you will lose each other and everything that has been so beautiful and good. I looked into my husband's loving eyes and I heard this voice. I knew that no matter how much I might try not to hear it, I would still hear it anyway. I would not be able to silence it because it was right. It was speaking the truth. I have often noticed that people act as if everything were permanent. They simply do not think of the future. Most of them go through life as if they would never be obliged to die, and as if their loved ones were not mortal beings. They refuse to realize that our time together here on earth is only a gift of short duration, as it will someday have to end. Sooner or later, one or another dies, and everything is over. People refuse to think about it, but whether they think about it or not, it is so. No one can deny it. But what is the sense of being happy if destiny is inexorably going to take this gift away from us someday? What's the good of being happy if we're obliged to be even unhappier later? We struggle for happiness, and when we've attained it, we know in advance we must lose it. The greater the happiness, the greater the loss. In the days when I was not yet so happy, I was actually much happier because I did not yet have the possibility of losing my happiness. So it becomes evident that the only person who is ever happy is really and permanently happy. So it becomes evident that only the person who is never happy is really and permanently happy. What a terrible contradiction. And why is this so? Because everything lasts only for a short time, because nothing is permanent, because everything dies and everything passes away, and everything must pass away. Oh, time. Oh, mortality. How long will I have to continue to suffer as a prisoner in your chains? How often will I have to bang my head against your black, impenetrable wall? You have poisoned every happy moment of my life, because I always had to realize, in the very moment I had something, it was already lost, for it had to come to an end. And now I'm grateful to you, O mortality, because you never even for a moment allowed me to enjoy passing temporal happiness. This constant suffering led me to find the unending, infinite eternity, the eternal divine being itself. In those days, to be sure, I had not the faintest inkling of all this. I did not know that this condition in which a person feels as if he were in a desert, crying from the depths of his soul for help, is the forerunner of salvation. Just as the Bible tells us, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, I make straight the path of the Lord. I baptize you with water, but after me there will come one stronger than I, the latchet of whose shoes I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose. He shall baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. During that period of my life, I was still in the desert, crying soundlessly for help and shedding invisible tears. I was being baptized by water with tears and did not know that the time was soon at hand when I would get acquainted with the eternal being. For after this condition there comes he who says of himself, I am the resurrection and the life. Whosoever believeth on me, even though he die, yet he shall live, and who baptizes with the Holy Spirit and with the fire. But he was not yet there, and I was still experiencing the John the Baptist condition. I was crying in the wilderness for help, for I was all alone with my desperation, as if in a desert. I did not want to tell my husband anything about the desperate state of my mind that I was in. He was completely happy and would not have been able to understand me if he had no such ideas and was still dreaming the dream of mortal people. Why should I awaken him and make him unhappy? I saw no solution at all for my problem, as no one could have said that I was wrong. At best, he would have had to admit that everything is destined to pass away, and the one and only consolation is not to think about it. For my part, however, I was not satisfied at all at the idea of overlooking reality, and even less satisfied by the fairy tales of religion about the other side and the other world. These are figments of the imagination, intended to be a sedative to people. Whoever can believe them is happy, but a thinking person insists on having proof. Within myself, I constantly bore a heavy spiritual burden without being able to shake it off. Sooner or later, however, a constant burden on the soul is bound to affect the body.